to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Well, hello and welcome to Two Roads Crossing. My name is Barry Schwenk. I'm a veterinarian, a pastor, and your host as we explore the intersection of faith and veterinary medicine. Today, we're blessed beyond measure to have Curtis Gibbs join us again. Curtis is a CVM U.S. representative to the western part of the United States for CVM. And I invited him here for a very special conversation, somewhat of a bittersweet conversation, actually. The sweet part is that Curtis is here. So thanks, Curtis. I appreciate that. But I wanted to talk with Curtis about making transitions, specifically about for a lot of us, knowing when, where, why, and how to move can be rather challenging. I think early on in my conversations with CVM, with the church, with the clinic that I work at, my answer is pretty consistent. I'm really not dedicated to you. I'm dedicated to where Christ is taking me. But for a lot of us, we have that kind of mindset where we want to listen to God and go where He's calling us. The question then becomes, how do I know that I'm hearing Him? How do I know what He's asking me to do? And then how do I take those steps in order to make those changes? And those are all really big questions. And I invited Curtis to talk with me about it because, and here comes the bitter part, today is going to be my last official podcast as host with Two Roads Crossing. And I'm welcoming Curtis in, who's going to grab the reins and take this team onto the next stage. So Curtis, I wanted to talk to you about all of this transition. How are you feeling about stepping into Two Roads Crossing?
Yeah, I'm feeling a couple different things. I'm feeling one that I have smaller feet than you, so I'm not going to be able to fill your shoes. As evidenced by the ratings are all 5-star, and so I went ahead this morning and logged a 1-star rating to go ahead and dip the ratings down before I take over. That way, it's in the 4th. But also excited. The podcast idea, is something that, I think I know you thought about it long before it started, and it popped in my mind, and Lauren Charles and I had talks about that too. And it was like, it's been nice to see this come to fruition. And now, you've done such the heavy lifting to get it going. You and a team will certainly give a shout out to here in a little while. So I'm excited. I think it's in such a great spot. So much of the groundwork has been laid just to be able to pass the baton and host, because the one thing we do have at CVM is so many awesome people who have stories of faith to share. And so really, it's just like a real life, real impact when we put them on the stage to share with students and professionals. Let's give them a platform, shine the light on them, and let God's stories go forth from them.
Yeah, and that's been from the very beginning. This conversation, the conversation began in earnest during COVID. We had talked about this in the training department for years, even before that. And there was just always kind of some hesitancy, and for one reason or another from CVM. CVM's doing so many things, and adding one new thing is always a challenge. And so there's always kind of hesitancy. And then we get into this time of COVID, and we experimented a little bit with fireside chats, which were those regular conversations. Because one of the strengths of CVM, what you mentioned, is that there are so many faithful believers out there who are working hard within this profession. God has been doing some amazing things in their lives. And the thing that we missed the most, especially during COVID, was that connection. everyone felt so alone and isolated, and we wanted to be able to have conversations again. Not just that, but we wanted also, because we couldn't necessarily gather together where we would have those conversations, we were trying to figure out how we could have a conversation where everyone could be involved, but also kind of focus in on one person's story. And with fireside chats, that we did I think that we experimented with that for a little while. And then from there, the podcast was just kind of a natural transition. But then the question is, how do you sustain that? How do you sustain that in a time when you could gather together now? Is a podcast or these kinds of conversations, are they still relevant? Are they still going to meet the needs of the folks of CVM? So now we've talked about this for a little while, and behind the scenes, there's always, for the folks listening, you all are unfortunately hearing this for the first time. Curtis and I have been talking about this for the last couple of months, and we've been working through things with CVM leadership about this transition. During that time, what is it that you're most excited about for the podcast, and what are you worried about, or what scares you the most?
Yeah, I start with the excitement bit. It's just listening to the people that you've that have been interviewed on Two Roads Crossing, and just hearing the stories, and it's people like that I get excited. But the ones I know, which I know many were on your list to get to. You have a list there that you kind of laid out some options, and I'm excited. For example, I saw our beloved retired CEO, Dr. Kip Flowers. He's probably going to be one of my first guests, and mention that by him. And so even though you've done close to 60 plus sessions, there's so many great people like CVMs to reach out and continue to get to, whether it's students or professionals or field workers or people that are slightly outside the CVM family, like you've mentioned as well, like authors of maybe missional books that might come in, or theological people. Every once in a while, you're bringing faith and vet med together. And so just that bit is the thing that I'm excited about. Again, just platforming someone and interviewing them and posting that, whether someone is consuming it, on the drive home tomorrow, or whether as someone is, honestly finding it 2 years from now because it's banked and it's there. And that way those stories are recorded, and it's not just a live event that just goes off into the ether and only available for those that are there, but it's somewhere parked for people to listen to and return to those stories of faith. And, nervous about just keeping it on mission, on point, just continuing to meet with people and make something that is fun to listen to, but encouraging to listen to. All that stuff will be a challenge, in today's world that's kind of crowded with, other things that you can listen to and other podcasts or what have you. But, as you've seen, CVM has really valued this, and the number of our followers right now is continuing to grow, which is exciting. And so we want to just keep on that track.
Yeah, it's also exceptionally humbling as our number of subscribers and the number of views continue to climb. And that, when you talk about staying on mission, I think that's crucially important. And this is part of the conversation that, again, that happens behind the scenes, that's ongoing with CVM leadership. And it happens, it's not just for podcasts, but it's also, I've had similar conversations at the church. I've had similar conversations at the clinic. I've had similar conversations with the school district. I've had, if a program, a ministry, if an outreach, if that's all dependent on one person, then you've really missed the mark. And what I'm excited about is that the overall vision and connection that's happening through the podcast is, to some degree, certainly there will be some responsibility on the person who's hosting to do and to organize and to do a lot of those things. But ultimately, what you want is God's story to ring through. and that's what I've been so excited about. I was meeting with some of the CVM board members yesterday to talk about a couple of things with my transition away from CVM, and we were just talking about how from the first time that I connected with CVM, I was sold. Right. And it wasn't because of who the director was, although Kit's a wonderful person to interview. And it wasn't about, sitting down and listening to Dr. Dormany talk about what God laid on his heart really impacted me. And so from that point forward, even before I became an employee of CVM, that conviction for me as I'm walking to be intentional about my faith and my vocation, intertwined and working, it just it just became second nature, and there are times where I did it better than other times, and but certainly that's the whole point, is for us to have these conversations for people who are trying to work through that, to hear God's story and how God is calling us to work, how God is using us to call people unto himself, how he's using us to serve others, to love others. That's the story that has to come through. And this is the privilege that I've had over the last year and a half with this podcast, is just hearing how God has been working in the lives of so many different people. That's just a blessing. And so I'm excited for you, because it's a little bit, it can be a little bit scary, but at the same time, it's a huge blessing. Kind of like going on a mission trip, right? We talk about that with short-term missions all the time. You go in order to serve, but at the same time, God teaches you so many things, and that's the blessing on the other side, is being able to see God moving and hear his story through everybody. How is this going to fit in with all of your other duties, and how are you going to balance? Because we had these podcasts, these wonderful podcasts with Rob Goodman, talking about being constantly in the act of balancing, which have been really convicting for me, which is really a big portion of why I'm having to step back from this. But how is this all going to fit together in with your current ministry?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Something that we certainly all had to consider of sustaining this at CVM, but who does it with you? Making some life good wise choices and stepping back and such. And I would say that I think one of the best lessons I learned from the first pastor I ever worked under, or actually one of the first pastoral conferences I went to, was every yes to something is a no to something else. And so you really have to go, I mean, everything sounds great, and then you do everything, and then so every time you say yes to something, it can be a no to something else. And so there will have to be some, keeping an eye on other tasks and pruning some things. But for the most part, the thing that makes it a good transition for me, or easy transition, easier, is that, I'm with people a lot. So, when I do a school visit, can also record a podcast with the faculty advisor. Or when I go to CVM CE, maybe I can record several episodes because I'm with people and just schedule some time. And so there will be some ways that will make it a natural fit. But you also, you have to consider your family. You have to consider your workload and such. But I also think, there's something to the fact that, God creates us to have excitement and enthusiasm toward things, looking for, like, this is something I'm really looking forward to. And usually that's something that God kind of calls you to. He doesn't normally, create you to have excitement and interest in doing a thing. And, but he created you with that, but he doesn't want you to do that. Like, that's kind of rare. I mean, there are things we do in life that none of us want. Like, nobody's like, I'm excited to take out the trash. Well, yeah, there's all these things in life we have to do. But there are things like this, that are like, I'm excited to do it. And it fits into who I feel I'm sort of created to be, just in being around people and having conversations, just like you were. I think that comes from our pastoral background. So I'll flip it to you. We're talking transitions. There's a great story, and you kind of alluded to it there in a second by saying you had conversations with the school district and whatever. You shared this great anecdote where some of the kids you coach call you Reverend Dr. Coach Barry, a man of many. You've got a veterinary degree, you're a pastor, you coach. So, how have you decided something that you've built up and is thriving? How have you decided when it's been the right work-life call to transition, if you will, out of something like this?
So interestingly enough, I would say that first pastoral conference that you went to got it partially right, because I have been in the habit of saying yes to one thing and then also saying yes to everything else. And so but the reality is that by saying yes to something, indeed you are saying no to something else, because what that means is there are a lot of things. I was having a more difficult time giving 100% to the things of great value. And so by continuing to take on things, I was cutting back. And so, even now over the last, probably since October, I've been working, 20 hours for CVM, 20 hours at the clinic. I'm working 40 hours for the church. And then depending on what time of the year it is, I'm working 10 to 20 hours a week for whether it's with swimming or with soccer or youth soccer, or and that adds up. And there's a time early in my life, the very first job that I had, I was logging between 80 and 100 hours a week, and I did that for 2 years, and it just burned me. It just burned me out, and even good things can become way too much. And I found myself back at that place again, and realized that I have a daughter who's now going to be be a junior in college. I have a son who's a junior in high school, going to be a junior in high school, a freshman in high school. And I realized that there were a lot of the things that I do as part of our family dynamic. But then there's also a lot of things that take me away from the family as well. And I'm finding that as those hours piled up, family was suffering. My duties, even at the church, were struggling. It's hard to be at the hospital, at a certain time when someone needs it, but also to be scheduled someplace else. And it just got to the place where it was too much. And for me, one of the things that, especially, talking with Rob these last few months, has been to kind of get back to even to what you were saying, is that there has to come a point where you have to step back and say no to something in order to better fulfill the obligations that you have. And that's kind of where I was. I've been an employee of CVM for almost 2 decades now, connected to them for probably close to 3 decades. And it's been a wonderful time and a wonderful experience, but also finding I'm at the place with CVM that the things that CVM wants and needs for me can just as easily be served by someone else who can give it the full attention, as opposed to kind of the piecemeal that I've had to do, which is tough, because especially like you mentioned with the podcast, things are growing, but that to me says, oh, that's a good time. We've done all the heavy lifting, and now hopefully we need someone enthusiastic and talented and skilled and passionate about it that can then give it the full attention that it really needs. And so, yeah, I've been really thankful about you stepping into that role for sure.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. So let me. One of the things that we used to do these surveys, you'll remember, and it's been a number of years since we did them, but we would do these surveys, and it would be to our CVM population of what do you most want to hear about, and that was for, e-learning or real life, real impact talks or what have you. And consistently, the two things that came back, the top one that came back was always work-life balance. And so with your pastoral hat now on, but speaking to your vet world hat, many of our professionals, even students listening to this, struggle with that, and balance, sort of a faux term. You're never really going to have perfect balance, but what you are making a choice in a way of pruning or working towards a more work-life priority thing.
Yeah.
What would you speak to the vet world or say? Granted, everybody's situation is different, and some people don't have control over certain things. But what have you seen have been some steps that you would say people should take to maybe accurately find those work and life priorities and work towards a better scenario for themselves?
Yeah, every once in a while I'll see this, on the internet where someone will mention, as you're packing up your box and you're moving your stuff out of your office, there's someone packing a box to move into your office, and how quickly, as much as veterinary medicine is more than just a job. It's a calling, it's a vocation, it's a lifestyle. The reality is that, if you're not there, someone else will probably step in and fill in your place. And one of the things that I've been really convicted by is feeling like, from a professional standpoint, that I need to be all things for all people at all times, right? I had a lady this week who told me, I wouldn't sell her heartworm medication without having a heartworm test. She's like, I've been here for X number of years. I'm just going to go to the vet across the street. Well, yeah, that's probably what you're going to do, and that's the depth of that relationship. And yet, I'm willing to bend over backwards to do things to appease people like that who would really quickly and readily replace me. I'm cutting into the time of those that cannot as easily replace me. And so the time with my kids, the time with my wife, the time with my congregation, the time with my even the kids, the time that I spend out playing soccer or being out at the pool with the kids, there aren't people that can fill in those gaps as easily. And so I for me, from a professional standpoint, I have to take myself out of God's position and say, put it into proper perspective, and think about where are those places where, not that I'm irreplaceable, but that my impact is much greater, and the depth of that relationship is better served. And so for me, that was, trying to weigh all of these different things that I'm doing, and, having to cut out some of the, I've stepped down off the youth soccer board. I'm not doing that anymore, and stepped away from the youth swimming conference. And so there's lots of other little things. I feel like, my life, you ever done that spring cleaning where you pull everything out of the closets and everything's piled up on the bed in your house, and then you realize, I've got to put this all away before I can go to sleep? That's kind of where I am with my life right now. It's trying to undo all of those things. And from a professional standpoint, we get so busy just trying to continue to run that race that we're forgetting that there are some real places of impact that we're missing out on, for the sake of trying to please people that we are really not making that kind of impact with. There will be people that if you just don't give them what they want, they're going to go someplace else. There are others that if you don't give them what they want, they're still going to stick by you and still struggle through that. And that's where I want to make the greatest effort. And I need to do a better job of making that greater effort with those people that are, that have moral ownership in my life and in the ministry that I have. So it's not easy. It's not easy to do that. And I can't say that I'm an expert at it. But it's a place where I've been learning how to grow in that regard. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's that old say. You're right. Those kids you used to coach will miss you. They'll probably eventually find another coach.
Yep.
But your kids only have one dad.
That's right.
They can't go out and hire another one. So you're right. Of just sorting through those things, and you're right. It's especially hard thing in the vet profession, because there's a lot of people that look around and go, if I stop doing this, there isn't anybody that's going to step in. And yet, we always have to kind of go, all right, Lord, if you're calling me to this, do I also hope or trust you provide an answer or a path forward for these people, somebody to step in and it just continue to walk that forward.
Yeah.
Well, in this transition, let me ask you, what have you learned about CVM in doing the podcast? I mean, you've done so many different roles, even within CVM.
That's right.
Long-term missionary. You've done the region rep role, so you've had a whole. So it's not like there's nothing new under the sun, and yet you've
that's right.
near 70 episodes. What is something you're seeing with CVM right now?
And that's pretty funny because like there are very few roles in CVM that I haven't held at one point in time or another, between short-term missions, long-term missions, region rep, training, podcasts. I What I'm always amazed at is how the power of God connects us and unifies us. And really there's nothing new under the sun. And when you look within CVM, I think the greatest strength of CVM is its constituency. It's just women and men who are actively taking these two great passions, sometimes really more three, because you've got this family dynamic, you got this spiritual dynamic, you have this vocational dynamic, and trying to figure out how to honor God with it, not just how to have everything. Within CVM, I don't think there's a lot of folks that are just trying to have their cake and eat it too. They're genuinely actively trying to understand who God has created them to be, what his expectation of them is, and then how they're supposed to walk day in and day out in a way that honors God. And that to me, and again, this is part of why the podcast was born, is because I don't know that I've ever been to a CE meeting. I've never been to a conference or a prayer meeting or a short course, or I've never been to one of those, a real life, real impact. I've never walked away thinking, wow, what a bunch of shallow people. Right.
Sure.
I love those things because I can sit down at lunch with someone and I can listen to their story and I can hear their desire to serve, but also just the questioning and the seeking attitude of wanting to please God, but not knowing exactly what to do or how to do it. And so trying to work their way through life in a way that honors God. And that's, I think, the strength of CVM is a bunch of imperfect veterinarians who love Jesus, who are willing to share their stories with one another, to mutually edify, to strengthen, to cry with the people that are crying, to rejoice with the people that are rejoicing, and just share that bond as we go through life together. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the CEO, whether you're talking about the board of directors, whether you're talking about the staff, whether you're talking about a short-term mission participant, a state representative, a student at a school. That's what binds us together, is the Spirit of God. And I just absolutely, when I think about CVM, and we talked about this, I talked about this with the board members the other day. To me, CVM is not limited to the people that are employed at CVM. It's not limited to the people that join in at meetings. It is wholly and completely God moving among his people. And for that reason, I have this very romantic, idealized view of what CVM, not just what CVM is, but what CVM could be. And I will forever be grateful for that. That vision that God gave to Dr. Dormany is above and beyond anything that I could have imagined myself. And so I just love that. Absolutely. Well, that is now on you, my friend. I am going to be mailing you this microphone for continuity's sake.
Don't even clean the sweat off of it.
Not going to clean it. I will. No, the tears that have soaked through this thing. I will be continuing to listen. I will be continuing to pray for you. I thank you, sir, for stepping into this role. I think God has big things in store, not just for this podcast, not just for CVM, but for His people. And so I'm excited to see that next stage. But it's about time for us to sign off. And for me, before I do want to say thank you to a couple of people. Right now, Nina is going to be in the process of editing this video. She's someone behind the scenes who has done a lot of work for this podcast, for CVM, for e-learning. And it's hard sometimes working behind the scenes to get the credit, trying to balance homeschooling her kids and taking care of a family and doing all of this. And so, Nina, you are greatly appreciated. And I would be remiss if I did not mention Alex. Alex has also transitioned away from CVM here in this last year. But Alex and I, during COVID, when the training department was stripped down, it was just me there for a while, working a couple of hours a week and a lot more volunteer hours than I'd like to admit. And then Alex transitioned over to kind of help me out a little bit. And so we were a committee of two working hard at trying to provide those fireside chats and transitions during a really lean time at CVM. But when that podcast, when leadership finally accepted the idea of trying this out, Alex and I spent a lot of hours on Zoom brainstorming and praying and trying to come up with really the actual vision for this podcast, what it means, what it's supposed to be, what God's wanting to do through this podcast. And that idea of Two Roads Crossing was born out of a lot of hours of us just seeking God's direction. And then Alex, from a creative standpoint, creating logos and putting together those initial intros, which is the voice, my daughter's voice, Emily, forever marked in time with the intro and outro for these podcasts, putting together all those videos and things like that. Alex did not get nearly as much appreciation or recognition as what she was due, because none of this could be possible without her. And certainly, the folks that have been listening, I cannot voice how much appreciation I have for you as well. Not just our speakers, but our listeners, this family that's kind of starting to grow around this podcast of people who are actively seeking what God is directing and calling for them to do in their lives. And I really do appreciate your support. And I can't wait to see as you continue to grow with Curtis at the helm. I'm excited to see what that next stage is going to look like. I have a sneaking suspicion, I know, and it's a good thing. And so keep tuning in, keep giving him your feedback, so that way we can continue to serve one another. And it may be that you and I don't see each other for a little while. We may not see each other on a weekly basis for sure. But there may be a time where we bump into each other at a CE conference or maybe at a CVM event. And I would love for you to come up and just say hi, and maybe we can sit down at a table and share a cup of coffee and just talk about what God's been doing in our lives. Share a little bit of the ups and downs, and just reflect on how good God is, even in those times of struggle, even in those times of plenty, how we can count on him every step of the way, and then ponder the uncertainty of the future, but knowing that we can trust our good God. And then maybe as we're sitting there having a cup of coffee, we can just ponder and reflect back on how together we have learned how to live well at the intersection of Two Roads Crossing.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you are blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of two roads crossing.